I wanted to ask about our story today on Tom Pitfield. I was wondering if you knew about his ties to the tobacco industry before our story, when you hired him in your office. If you have any moral qualms about his ties to the industry, will he be involved in any health discussions or policy discussions?
I don't know.
As a result of conservative pressure, recent polling, or maybe both, Mark Carney's government has slammed the brakes on its 2026 electric vehicle mandate, suspending next year's sales quota while launching a 60-day review. He then grew visibly irritated when pressed about his advisor Tom Pitfield's ties to the tobacco industry, a sign that Mark Carney may have finally realized that the honeymoon period that he had with voters is over. Let's take a look.
What's going on is not a transition. It's a rupture. And its effect will be profound. Workers displaced from their jobs. Supply chains that have existed for decades disrupted. Companies forced to change where they find their materials and their products. And all of this is causing an extreme uncertainty that's holding back massive amounts of investment and, as a consequence, slowing economic growth. We're in a position right now where Canada currently has the best trading deal with the United States of any of their trading partners. 85% of our trade with the U.S. is now tariff-free. And we have the lowest tariff rate of any country in the world. But we also know that given all those changes, given the rupture, we can't rely on our most important trading partner as we once did.
Still trying to put that out there, Carney. We've effectively failed in all of our negotiations since our government formed. I know. We'll turn that around and say, oh, well, we should have just looked in the mirror. We already have the best deal. We don't have to negotiate anything. We've been wasting our time for the past few months negotiating with Donald Trump's crew. Jolie, did everybody buy that? This is basically what's going on here. And no, Canadians are not buying this. Not at all. How do we know that? Well, we'll get to that in a little bit, folks. We'll get to that in a little bit. But moving on, Mark Carney decided that he was going to talk about the EV mandate because there's a lot of pressure building on this already.
And it's not all about money. Some of it is about regulation. So to add flexibility to the automotive sector, we will remove the 2026 electric vehicle availability standard, which specifies the share of new vehicle sales that must be electric next year. This will provide immediate financial relief to automakers at a time of increased pressure on their competitiveness. And the government will begin immediately a 60-day review of the EV standard to identify future flexibilities and ways to reduce costs. And we'll advance new options to bring more and more affordable electric vehicles to Canadians.
Wait a minute. I thought Steve McKinnon and all of the Liberals were standing up, making fun of the Conservatives, trying to say that there wasn't going to be a ban on selling gas-powered vehicles.
Mr. Speaker, this line of questioning is somewhat absurd. Whether you want to get on a Skidoo, whether you want to get on an all-terrain vehicle, whether you want to gas up your F-150, whether the plumber wants to take the truck to work, that is that person's choice in this country. There is no ban on gas-powered vehicles. This is completely conjured up fake showmanship from the Conservatives. Unbelievable. There is an auto sector in Canada. We're going to stand up for the people in it. We're going to protect it, and we're going to give consumers choice.
Pretty sure I remember that. Pretty sure all of you remember that. So you're finally listening to all of the automakers that have said, dude, this is going to kill the audio industry in Canada. And you're finally listening to conservatives. You're finally listening to Canadians. But for 1 year. The problem is he doesn't actually make any promises for 2027, 28, 29, 30, and all the way up to 35. This is the concern. So this is where we need to continue to put pressure on Mark Carney, especially during this 60-day review. Now, we at Northern Perspective have an idea on how to do this, so stay tuned in the coming days on that. But this is an example where, it seems that Mark Carney is walking back everything that he said in the election, and he's even trying to walk back things that he was supposedly in favor of. So the question for Mark Carney is what do you believe? What is your ideology? Or is it just capitulation? Because that certainly seems like it's an ideology that fits you right now. You capitulated on the DST tax. You capitulated to Trump. You let him impose even more penalties when he was talking about implementing the de minimis elimination. That was done. You said nothing. And now you're capitulating. This guy's brand is surrender, folks. That's the Mark Carney brand. Crisis and then surrender. So, but this is going to be interesting, folks, and this certainly feeds into some of the conservative victory points that they've been gaining here, because they've been pushing hard on this EV mandate in the fall session, and they didn't even have that long to do so, and they were able to push them on it. But again, that probably has something to do with the polls. Stay tuned.
Prime Minister Tom Harrod at CBC. Can I ask you, if you're reviewing the EV mandate, are you open to the idea of scrapping it altogether like the Conservatives are demanding? And I guess how should Canadians, you were just asked this in French, but how should Canadians, I guess, see your commitment to Canada's climate goals? And if I could get you to clarify just on another matter, Minister LeBlanc said yesterday you're now pursuing smaller deals on certain sectors with the United States on tariffs. Why are you pursuing that strategy?
Well, let me, I'm going to take the second part first, and I'll come back to you first, which is Minister LeBlanc. What Minister LeBlanc said yesterday is what I said the day before, actually, so it's good to see that we're lined up. We're all lined up in the strategy. What's happening with our situation with the United States, and I'll do this quickly. We have the best deal of any country right now. 85% tariff-free, lowest tariff rate. The issue is the strategic sectors, and it's a big issue. Flavio Volpe is here. Thank you for coming. Flavio, he knows it well. Autos, steel, aluminum, forest products, copper. Those are the big issues. And those are areas that the United States has identified, we would agree, but is identified as strategic. So they have a different tariff regime for those sectors. And the only way to tackle those is to go directly to the sectors and recognize the interdependence between Canada and the United States. The fact that Canada makes the United States more competitive in these sectors, and structure agreements in and around there, or look to structure agreements around those. Now, the U.S. has a very tough tariff policy around these, to be clear. So it's real work, it's hard work, but that's where we're focused. That is the, quote, smaller, they're not small, they're big, but sector-specific deals.
Okay, so how they're going to try and frame this, folks, is we already have the best deal already. And if they manage to get the tariffs lower, which is probably going to come, then they're going to say, we already had the best deal, and our team made it even better. That's what you're going to hear. Because he's tried to completely reset the playing field here. Not as, we failed to get anything done, but we're so great we didn't have to do anything because we already have the best deal in the world when it comes to the trade deals with the United States. That's what they're going to try and say. And then, when they finally get these tariffs to come down to a bit, they're going to say, we made the best deal even better. That's how great we are. This is how they're going to try to gaslight and completely spin this in their favor. I don't know when it's going to happen, but it's going to happen. And that's what I'm expecting them to say.
With respect to EV mandates, let's be absolutely clear. We have an auto sector because of the massive change in U.S. trade policy, is under extreme pressure. We recognize that. That's why we put in place the major liquidity facility, and it is an enormous liquidity facility, the large enterprise tariff facility. That's why we're putting in place $5 billion in the strategic response fund. That's why we're working with worker retraining. And that's why we're also looking for buy Canadian opportunities with that sector, okay, that and other sectors. In that context, the EV mandate this year adds to the liquidity issues they have, the financial challenges that these producers have. They've got enough on their plate right now. So we're taking that off, allowing them to focus, working with them. We're using this as an opportunity as part of a broader strategy on climate competitiveness to look at all our measures to help get greenhouse gases down, as I said a moment ago in French, greenhouse gases down in the key sectors, as well as across the economy. And we'll look at the interaction between the EV mandate, our clean fuel standards, our investment tax credits, our trade policy, all of those elements, because what this government is focused on is absolutely results, not saying something's going to happen at a certain time, but giving workers and businesses the tools to make it happen.
Okay. So, because the auto sector is under such pressure, it's the auto sector, nothing to do with what the Conservatives are saying, nothing to do with the polling shifts, it's only to do with that. Got it. And that's why you're going to be looking at the clean fuel standard, aka carbon tax 2. Got it. See, if the Liberals were smart, and they may be smart enough to realize this, folks, they don't want to give the Conservatives another consumer carbon tax platform. Don't want to do that. That would be a massive, massive error. And if they leave the EV mandates in, and if they leave carbon tax 2 in, that does just that. So he's going to have to try and spin this as, well, you know, we're not doing what the Conservatives say, we're doing it because of a whole bunch of other reasons. And this is where it actually leaves them open to attack. Not necessarily by the Conservatives, but by the NDP and by the Green Party. And that's a good thing, because if the NDP and the Green Party are able to start siphoning off votes back from the Liberals based on climate change, because they think that the Liberals are not actually doing enough and they're backtracking and they're not for the environment and all this stuff, that will siphon support away from the Liberals and raise the support of the NDP and raise support of the Green Party. It's not really going to siphon much away from the Conservatives, which is a good thing. So this is the issue. But I keep talking about the polls. We're going to get to them right at the end. Don't worry, because a lot of this is actually reflected in what's happening with the polls, and it's going to continue to erode based on this current pattern if what we're predicting is going to come to pass. So just hang in there for a minute. But before we go anywhere else, I want to get to probably the most tense moment in this press conference, and it had nothing to do with EVs, had nothing to do with climate change, and it had to do with another advisor with potential conflicts of interest under Mark Carney.
Next question, Laura. Morning, Prime Minister. Laura Stone, Globe and Mail. I wanted to ask about our story today on Tom Pitfield. I was wondering if you knew about his ties to the tobacco industry before our story, when you hired him in your office, if you have any moral qualms about his ties to the industry, given the push to stop smoking and vaping, and if he will recuse himself from any health discussions or debates in your office.
Well, the first thing is people in my office, as you know, and Canadians would expect, go through conflict of interest and ethics procedures, and appropriate screens are put in place and they're followed. That's the case for Mr. Pitfield. That's the case for all the staff in my office. That's the first. The second, there's certain activities which are legal in this country, which I don't necessarily follow or approve of. But you know, that's people. We have tobacco industry in the country. We have people who smoke in this country. It is legal to buy cigarettes in this country. I make no judgment about that.
Thank you.
I can't hear you.
Will he be involved in any health discussions or
I
policy
look,
discussions?
I don't know.
Next question, please.
Non-issue.
Well, that was pretty dismissive. Because the most important part of that was, hey, this guy who has strong ties to the tobacco industry, is he going to be recusing himself for any health discussions, related to tobacco, smoke, cancer, all of that? Is he going to do that? And Mark Carney's just like, waves at his moderator. She says, next question. He's like, it's a non-issue. It's funny. Where's all the legacy media coming after Mark Carney, talking about the fact that he has a repeated pattern of dismissing journalists? Look inside yourself, everybody. Where's the legacy media on that? Oh, right. They're not going to call him out on that. That's right. Only Pierre Poilievre, when Pierre Poilievre actually challenges the premise of questions because they're framed as gotcha questions. These are actually legitimate questions that deserve legitimate answers from the most conflicted prime minister in the history of this country. But, let's go after Pierre Poilievre for questioning the premise of reporters' questions. Anyway, folks, let's take a look at the latest Angus Reid poll that dropped today. All right. So we're not going to show you the party numbers yet. Wanted to get to this one first because this actually is very, very interesting. So this is a snapshot of what Canadians think of Mark Carney. And the top line you can see is the positive favorability, and the red line is negative favorability, and the gray line is people don't know. And this goes back to February when he won the Liberal leadership, and off you go. So the interesting thing is Mark Carney's net unfavorability was around 41% at the right before the election. It dropped to 29% in June, so everyone heard the throne speech and said, yeah, okay, I kind of like that guy. And then you saw a bunch of people say, I don't know, around the same time, which is why you see that rise to 15%. And his favorability was at 57%. But since then, he's actually dropped 6% on positive favorability, and everyone is starting to make up their mind. And they've said, no, I was right. Goes back up to 41% unfavorability. And you're even seeing some people, siphon away from favorable to unfavorable. So that's the first thing we need to highlight here. So next one, how confident are you in Canada's negotiating team, including Prime Minister Mark Carney, to deliver a good deal for Canada in these negotiations? So, weren't particularly confident. It was about 50-50 in July. It was a little worse in August, and now that's gone up to 53% in September. So what does that say? Well, what that says to me is that Canadians aren't buying what Mark Carney is selling by the fact that we have the best deal in Canada, and that he keeps putting these self-imposed deadlines, which I think he's finally learned his lesson because there is no other deadline now. Now he's basically saying, we have the best deal. We'll talk about this in Kuzma. So that's something really encouraging to me, is that people aren't buying the fact that, we have the best deal in Canada right now, and they're just saying, this isn't important. That's very positive to me. And finally, we get to this. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the second poll that has the Conservatives ahead of the Liberals in the federal polling. So Liberals have fallen 6 points. 6 points. That's a lot. That's over 10%, folks, on the minds of Canadians as to who they would vote for right now if an election were called. And look at where those 6 points went. 4 of them went to the NDP, at least, and potentially 2 of them went to the Bloc. So what does that say? I think what that says is that the Conservatives are holding their base. That's the good thing. And that base hasn't really budged since the federal election. That's a good thing. And what's happening to the Liberals is people who voted NDP and people who voted Bloc before are now saying, not what I signed up for, not what I was promised. I don't think I'm going to vote Liberal again. And they're going back home. And that's a good thing. Because remember what we said before. A strong NDP and a stronger bloc means a weak Liberal Party. This is what we want to see. We want to see the Conservative base stick to their guns. So that means they're not really going to move. There's going to be some fluctuation up and down, but they're not really going to move at all. And then we want to see the NDP and the bloc start to erode support from the Liberals. So that means the Liberal support overall starts to go down, and that starts getting distributed between the two other parties. And we need that to happen, especially if we want no confidence vote next year, after the NDP actually finish their leadership race. Because the NDP, they want party status. And the only way it makes sense for them to go back to an election is if they think they can get party status. So right now, this is moving in the right direction. So what I expect the NDP to start doing is to hammer on the climate stuff, to call the Liberals hypocrites, to start saying they're not progressive. They lied to you. They're against labor. Look at what they did with Air Canada. Look at what they did with CN, all this stuff. They need to go back to their roots. And NDP, if you're listening, stop talking about this gender ideology stuff, especially restricting who can actually sign for your leadership candidates and who's allowed to go to your convention for delegates. You are going to alienate voters left, right, and center if you do that. People are more concerned with affordability right now. Nobody cares who's a delegate that actually gets to go. So you need to deal with that, and you need to deal with that fast. And as for the bloc, no lessons need to be given to the bloc. They have a very, very shrewd and capable leader in Yves Blanchette. Don't agree with their platform, but he is a sharp politician, as we saw in the last session in the last parliament. So I expect the bloc to come back and come back well. And these polling numbers are actually very well timed, because as we move, remember the Terrebonne riding adjudication is actually going to happen in court on October 14th. So by then, we may even see some more slippage in the Liberal numbers that would hopefully further cement a bloc win in that Terrebonne by-election. That would be a good thing. And then what happens then is that the Liberals lose one more seat and the opposition overall gets one more on the back, and then the Liberals slip to 168 seats. So this is what we're seeing, folks. What a day, what a week, what a month, what a summer for Mark Carney. He squandered all of that political will, and he seems to be flailing left, right, and center, making lots of promises. Nothing's happening. And now he's actually giving in to the demands of the Conservatives. Whether he intends to or not, he seems to be very afraid of their opposition game. And I think this shows it.